All right, welcome to our welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Our mostly weekly New York Giants Preservation Society meeting. Today we have a great author, Jim Kaplan, who's going to be discussing his book, The Greatest Game Ever Pitched. Before we do that, just want to update you on a few items. We are basically set till June as far as events go. I added Marty Appel. Everybody knows him associated with the Yankees. He wrote a great book on Casey Stengel. So we'll be talking about Casey Stengel, how he came up with the Giants and how McGraw trained him, become, one of the greatest managers of all time. And Neil Shearer, who did something at the Morris Jumel Museum about the Polo Grounds, will also be coming aboard to talk about his story and his display. We have some new people in here tonight. I welcome everybody who's first timer. Just to mention a few, we have a couple from the O'Duel Sabre chapter in here. And we also have author Lou Hernandez. Lou is going to be speaking to us. He wrote a book on John McGraw. And then later on in the summer or fall, he also wrote a book about the 1933 Giants and Bill Terry. So, Lou, nice to have you. Welcome aboard, and don't be a stranger.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Glad to be with you.
And I also did a little house cleaning or keeping, whatever. Behind me, you see that Giants Preservation Society emblem. I had some buttons made of those. They look really great. And once they're here, if anybody wants, send me. I'm not a post office guy. Send me a self-addressed envelope, and I'll throw one in there for you if you desire to have one. They're pretty cool. I think the logo is really nice. So, with that said, I met Jim Kaplan. When I say met, I mean on the phone. Maybe 10 or 11 years ago, I spoke to him, and he asked me to write a review on Amazon about the book. I took it out of the library, remember? It was fabulous. So I wrote a great review, I thought. And then I went and bought the book. And one of the best things was Steve and I were in Cooperstown, and Marichal was there in 2011 and signed the book. So I got to get Jim to sign it if we ever do cross paths and meet in person. But Jim is here to speak about his great book. And Jim, welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society meeting. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Floor is yours.
Okay. First, I want to thank you for this opportunity. It's great to be able to talk about the playing of baseball rather than the failed negotiations and the lockout. The owners have really deprived us of all the joys we used to experience during the Hot Stove League. The signings, the trades, the arbitration, the talk, the speculation, the debate, and it's been depressing for all of us, I'm sure. Now, I should tell you, even though I live in New England and root for the Red Sox, the Giants have always had a special place in my heart. Probably began with my father, who was a Giants fan, even though he lived in the Bronx. He may have anticipated what Theo Epstein's father would tell him: don't root for the Yankees, they're bullies and bankers. The Yankees are always considered the flagship of baseball with their 27 titles and Babe Ruth and DiMaggio's hitting streak and perfect game in the World Series and so on. But I think the Giants have every bit as much to offer. So I'm going to tell you some things that you undoubtedly already know, and maybe some things you don't or just haven't thought about lately. Christy Mathewson's 3 shutouts in 6 days during the 1905 World Series will never be replicated or even tried. John McGraw, 10 pennants and 3 World Series titles. Connie Mack said there's only been one manager, and his name is John McGraw. Bobby Thompson's shot heard around the world was certainly one of the iconic moments in baseball history, and was even mentioned in a Don DeLillo novel. And I think Willie Mays' catch in the 54 series has to be the most famous defensive play in the history of the postseason classic. Willie Mays must be the greatest player of all time because Joe Posnanski has said that in his new book, a terrific book called The Baseball 100. If there's a classier guy in baseball history than Monty Urban, I've never met him. And the Giants opened up the whole Caribbean. They were known as the Gigantes of the Caribbean. And it really struck me during the recent vote for the Hall of Fame that Jeff Kent, who had his greatest years with the Giants, has the greatest offensive statistics of any second baseman, didn't even come close. I hope he will in the future. So, and of course, Carl Hubbell's 5 strikeouts in a row in the 34 World Series was another great game and great achievement. So on to the greatest game ever pitched. I first heard about this from my friend Mark Cram Jr., then with the Philadelphia Daily News, now a freelance writer who did a terrific book on Joe Frazier. And while I was at Sports Illustrated, I heard about the game from Ron Fimright, a San Franciscan, who was actually at the game on a busman's holiday. He says it was the greatest game he ever saw. And among the games he saw were the 6th game of the 1975 World Series. So this was even more moving for him than that. So I did a story for a Sabre publication on the game, and I realized that something was missing, and that was a dual biography about Warren Spahn and Juan Marichal, the 2 guys who made this game possible. So before we get into the game, I'm going to give you some background on the 2 of them. Juan Marichal was born in 1937 in a fishing village, in a farming village near the Haitian border in the Dominican Republic. He didn't know his father, who died when he was 3, but his mother, known as his mother did a great job raising him. He would work the farm in the morning, and he would then walk 8 kilometers to school in the afternoon. And this woman, known as Doña Natividad, had a terrific farm. So you start out with Juan being anything but the stereotype of the indulged and lazy Latino. He was quite the opposite. When he was 9 years old, he almost died. There was a harvest festival in which a bunch of families got together, did the harvest, had a great meal. And afterwards, they left the kids alone. They had been swimming before the dinner, and Juan got into a ditch, with a water ditch, and he went into a coma for 7 days. And at the end of the 7 days, the doctor said if he didn't wake up before midnight, he would die. And he woke up at 11:45 p.m. So wonder no more about the joy he's carried through most of his life, and one of his many nicknames, Laughing Boy. He worshiped his brother Gonzalo, who was a good ball player himself. And when Juan was 15, Gonzalo got him to leave school and go to Santo Domingo, the capital, to play baseball. And he played for a bunch of teams. And the epic moment came when he pitched his team to victory over the Air Force team, the country's Air Force team. Sure enough, the next day he got a draft notice. This team was run by Trujillo's son, Rafael, and it said report to the Air Force. Of course, what they wanted him to do was pitch, which he did for the Air Force team very successfully. However, one day the team lost a doubleheader, and Rafael had all the players jailed for 5 days. They never again lost a doubleheader, as you can imagine.
Oh my God.
He was eventually signed by a guy named Rabbit Martinez. Boy, do I miss baseball nicknames. And he signed for the unheard of bonus of $500, which was more than they offered anyone else, at least from the Caribbean. So he went to the minors, and he had what he called mini depressions because of what he had to face, from language, cold weather, culture, and most important, segregation. But he never took it with him to the ballpark. And he went to the minors, and he not only survived it, but he had a terrific record. I think it was 50-26. And so he was signed by the Giants. And the first game he pitched on July 19th, 1960, he one-hit the Phillies. And the rest is history. He was on the road to the Hall of Fame. Now, Marichal and Spahn had a lot in common. It was more than just their high kicking delivery. And we'll see this from Spahn's biography. Warren Edward Spahn was born on April 23rd, 1921. He was named after his father, Edward, and President Warren Harding. He was raised by his father, Edward, himself a frustrated ball player. And Ed built a mound in the backyard and tutored Juan incessantly. The main thing he impressed on him was control. That was the biggest thing of all. He also told them to be respectful of other people, not to go off on something. There was no military draft in 1940. So Juan left school to sign with the Braves. He was a 19-year-old high school junior, but obviously a better ball player than a student. And he was signed by a scout, Billy Myers, who had left the Red Sox in disgust when they lowballed an offer to Sibby Sisti, who of course had a great career. Just another example of missed opportunities for my Red Sox. In 1940, he went to the minor leagues, Bradford, Pennsylvania, and he tore ligaments in his left shoulder and had to leave during the season. This sent his father, Edward, into a depression for which he was hospitalized. And Warren had to spend the last part of the season moving luggage at the railroad station and wondering if he had any future in baseball. But he did come back the next year and won 19 games at Evansville. He also suffered a broken nose from a teammate's errant throw. And that got him some nicknames he didn't like Hooks, the Nose, and the Great Profile. The team refused to give him an operation because they said that sometimes you get nasal problems from this operation. And besides, Warren, you're not a very good looking guy anyway. So he carried this through his life. Eventually, you probably know this story. He made it to the Braves in 1942, and he was brought into a game. Casey Stengel, the manager, told him to hit Pee Wee Reese. And Reese had already had some injuries and I think been hospitalized. Warren didn't do it. So Casey marched out to the mound and said, "Pick up your ticket back to Hartford. You have no guts." Casey later said, "I said no guts to a Hall of Famer and a war hero. Just shows I don't know what I'm saying some of the time." So Warren instead enlisted in the service on December 3rd, 1942. And he went down to Oklahoma's Camp Gruber, where he met his wife, Lorene Southard. And he was assigned to the 276th Combat Engineers Battalion. You know, if anyone had a tougher time in the military without actually getting killed than Warren, it's hard to imagine. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge, sleeping in tire tracks, unable to change his uniform for 30 days. He fought in the battle over the Hürtgen Forest and the bridge at Remhagen. He got shrapnel wounds and earned a Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and a Battlefield Commission, which made him one of the most awarded ball players in the history of the World War II. And June 10th, 1946, he had made the mistake of accepting the commission, and it delayed his way back to baseball for another year. But he was then promoted to the majors. And he was used to going long. Just one example, in 1948, he pitched a 14-inning game against the Dodgers and picked off Jackie Robinson twice. He had developed maybe the best pickoff move in baseball. So let's move to the game now. Played at Candlestick Park on June 2nd, actually 2nd and 3rd, 1963. It may be said that in this case, the stars and their stars were perfectly aligned. The strike zone had been from the top of the knees to the bottom of the armpits. And that year it was extended from the bottom of the knees to the top of the shoulders. Spahn was 11-3 when this game began and facing the same 8 Giants that he had no hit in 1941. Marichal, 17 days earlier, had no hit the Houston Colt 45s and was 12-3. And then, of course, there was the fact of Candlestick Park, the ultimate pitcher's park. Balls don't carry well in cold weather, and it's tough for hitters to bat with cold hands. Plus, you have the wind whipping off across the diamond over the left field fence toward right field, and the fog rolling in. So it couldn't have been a better situation. Now, how they warmed up for the game is interesting. Spahn he was a big kidder. He played a lot of practical jokes, not only to his own team, but to opponents even. He said this was his way of relaxing. Warren drove his son Greg crazy. He would throw 5 pitches and talk to people, another 5 and talk to people, and so on. But it was 5 pitches of each one of his deliveries, so he was able to find out what worked. And he also watched the other team's batting practice like a hawk. And he could pick up tendencies of the other players. Juan was a very religious man. He would place the medal of San Rafael around his neck and a picture of the Blessed Martin, the peacemaker, in his pocket, and would read 3 portions from the book of Psalms. And the way he prepared for the game, he would meet with his catcher Ed Bailey and Willie Mays to go over the hitters. Mays was very instrumental in telling him how to pitch different hitters and how to warm up and how to place the fielders. So I'm not going to detail every single inning of this 16-inning game, but the first inning may be instructive. For the Braves, Lee Mays popped to first, Frank Bowling singled, Henry Aaron fouled out to first, and Eddie Matthews struck out. The Giants, Harvey Keene popped out to shortstop, Willie Mays struck out, called strike 3. Willie McCovey grounded out to the pitcher. So what you had was 4 future Hall of Famers, Aaron, Matthews, Mays, and McCovey, and none of them got the ball out of the infield. Spahn was jamming hitters with his fastball, fooling left-handed hitters with his curve, and using the screwball that kept his career going when he picked it up in 1950. 53. And he wasn't even, he was not just throwing to right-handers, he's throwing to left-handers. And not just throwing yeah. And he was not afraid to pitch inside to right-handers. It's something Carl Hubble taught him. And Spahn, Marichal was throwing everything, and perhaps most effectively, the fastball. So in a game like this, a classic game like this, there are bound to be a lot of close calls, how it could have simply evaporated. And these guys were pitching very effectively out of trouble. For instance, in the second inning, Del Crandall reached second base on Harvey Keene's throwing error. Gaylord Perry used to bet his teammates that with a man on third and nobody out, Marichal would not allow any runs. So sure enough, Roy McMillan's fly to center, but Leonard Cepeda singled, stole second, but Spahn got Ed Bailey to hit to center field and Jose Pagan to foul out. So both guys were pitching well out of trouble. One thing they were doing effectively was keeping the ball down. As Hall of Famer Jim Bunning once said, a pitcher pitches low instead of high because how often have you seen a 410-foot ground ball? Nonetheless, Hank Aaron got all of a pitch in the fourth inning, flying deep to left field. Did you see him hit that ball? Marichal said later. It was going out of the park and then that wind came up. What a break that was. Marichal got Eddie Matthews out on strikes in the fourth, but Norm Larker walked and Mac Jones singled him to center. Now Del Crandall singled to center. Remember that there were 2 outs and Larker was running on contact. Willie Mays elected to one-hop the ball instead of diving for it and made an incredible throw home. What one writer for the San Francisco Chronicle called 100% perfect peg. When he got back to the dugout, his teammates simply shook his hand. There were no high fives, low fives, fist bumps, or anything else. The idea was that for everybody to be the same. Fifth inning, Lee May singled, stole second before Frank Bowling lined out to Keene. Sixth inning, Aaron popped to the catcher. Dennis Menke singled and stole second, but Larker popped out and Jones popped out to third. Through 6 innings, Marichal had a 4-hitter, Spahn had a 2-hitter. And one of the things that happened during the game, there was a guy named Dave Bush, who was a student at Cal Berkeley, who was listening to the game on the radio, big Giants fan, San Franciscan, and he found himself pulling for Spahn. Everybody was sensing that this old man, 42 years old, was doing something really remarkable. In the 7th, Del Crandall singled, thrown out stealing, and he would have scored on Spahn's double off the top of the right field fence. You can see that what close calls these were. Again, Marichal marveled at how the ball stayed in the park. 8th inning, Hank Aaron was on first. Ernie Bowman made a great stop deep in the hole to throw out Dennis Menke. Aaron went to second, but Larker flied to McCovey in left field. So you may wonder what was it like for people at the park? And there were no mascots. There was no blaring music. There were no distractions at all. People were content to simply sit there and watch the game. Some listening to it on a transistor radio. They didn't need all the hype that we see today. It was just enough to go to the ballpark, watch the game, and actually be able to speak with someone sitting next to you. So it went into the ninth inning now, and here was a place where the game could have ended. Willie McCovey came to the plate with his signature stance, his left shoulder way below his right shoulder. Now, as you know, Willie had a great disappointment the year before when he lined out to Bobby Richardson to end the 1962 World Series with runners on second and third. Ball goes through, the Giants win the series. Afterward, McCovey, who was a jazz fan and a man about town, maybe the most popular player in the history of the San Francisco franchise, went to a jazz club where Duke Ellington himself was playing. And Ellington, knowing what had happened, changed the name of one of his favorite songs to "You Hit It Good, and That Ain't Bad." Now, unfortunately, in the ninth inning, McCovey hit it good, but it turned out bad. He hit one of his patented moonshots over the right field foul pole. Most people thought it was fair, but Chris Pelakoutis, the first base umpire, ruled it foul. So the game went into extra innings. These guys were as strong as ever. From the 10th to the 12th, there was exactly one base runner for either team. So in the 14th inning, Alvin Dark, the Giants manager, who kept asking Juan if he was all right, if he wanted to stay in. And again, he asked him, and Marichal told him, "Alvin, do you see that man pitching on the other side? He's 42 and I'm 25. You can't take me out while that man is still pitching." So now I'm going to read to you about the denouement of the game in the 16th inning. In the bottom of the 16th, Spahn threw one screwball after another to the right-handed Harvey Keene, getting him out at last on a fly to center. Spahn had thrown 200 pitches, and Marichal more than that. As Mays stood in the on-deck circle, Marichal called to him, "Hit one now." His teammates chuckled. "I will, Chico," Mays said. Actually, Willie was in a slump and probably hoped just to make contact. The previous day, he had left men on base 5 times, heard boos in Candlestick Park, and watched his average plummet to 257. Spahn had limited him to 2 outfield flies, 2 infield grounders, a strikeout, and an intentional walk. Willie was exhausted. If there was any consolation, he figured Spahn was every bit as tired. David Rappaport, a neighbor of Willie's, emailed Mays' biographer, James S. Hirsch, that Mays routinely picked up 4 bats in the on-deck circle. He would swing them from behind his right shoulder until he swished them through the imaginary hitting zone, and a small cloud of dirt and pebbles would rise from just beneath him. Then he would settle on 1 bat, and with one additional practice swing, he would crack it through the air like an electric whip. Mays stepped to the plate with no prelude, like adjusting his batting helmet or knocking dirt from his spikes. In Out of My League, an account of pitching to all-stars in an exhibition, George Plimpton wrote that Mays, quote, gets set quickly at the plate, hopping eagerly into the batter's box, where he nervously jiggles and tamps his feet in the dust, twisting on his rear foot to get it solidly placed, staring down at the plate in concentration, to sense when his legs feel set. And when they do, he reaches out and taps the plate twice, 3 times with the bat before he sweeps it back over his right shoulder and cocks it. Then for the first time, he looks out at the pitcher. Anything but glowering, Plimpton writes, Mays seemed to inspect the pitcher as if he were a harmless but puzzling object recently deposited on the mound by a groundskeeper. That's the end of the Plimpton quote, and the rest is mine. Mays against Spahn, 256 warm-up pitches and 427 pitches to batters had been thrown, and almost as many returned from catcher to pitcher. Great fielding plays and errors, stolen bases and pickoffs, fly balls and ground balls, singles and doubles, some lucky breaks, at least to those wishing for extra innings, thousands of words over the PA system, and now great man against great man for the last time in the game. The wind had died down to a soft breeze, bathed in the soft, dueling lights that cast several shadows over each participant. Candlestick for once projected an otherworldly calm. Swelling now, Spahn threw his first pitch to Mays, another screwball. Instantly, he knew he was in trouble. Rather than rotate away from the batter, the ball hung before Willie, as juicy and tempting as a shining apple on a tree. Mays unleashed his signature swing, starting with his hands gripping a nearly vertical bat next to his side. He whipped it through the strike zone with ferocious speed, keeping both hands on the bat, even when it stretched way ahead of him and slightly to his left. At this point, he resembled an angler getting a strike from a humongous pitch and hanging on for dear life. Then Mays released his right hand and allowed the bat to swing down beside his left leg and onto the ground as he leaned forward, following the flight of the ball. His right leg was extended back, his left leg bent at nearly a 90-degree angle, his right hand suspended above his left knee. That statuesque pose, everything in perfect balance, has been captured in 1,000 photos and adorns the sculpture of Mays outside the Giants' AT&T Park. The ball headed over the infield, climbing inexorably. No fly ball into even a mild breeze was guaranteed to clear the left fence at Candlestick. And Alvin Dark began doing mental calculations in the dugout. He knew that shots between left center and right center had iffy prospects. Just how close, he wondered, would this be to the left field line? Relying on sound as well as sight, Dark's relievers and substitute catchers, including Al Stanek, on their bench past third base were more sanguine. When he hit it, we knew it was gone, Stanek said. It had that sound when it hits the meat part, wacko. We all just jumped up at the crack of the bat. Standing at third as the ball passed over his position, the Braves' Menke found his spirits plummeting as the Giants soared. Oh yeah, you knew by the sound of the bat, he said. I think Spahn had thrown enough home runs that he knew when it was out. We did the best we could, but we couldn't get a run for him. The ball carried, resisted whatever crosswind existed, and stayed fair by about 30 feet. In a Sports Illustrated retrospective years later, Ron Finwright described a high arc to left field, where after hanging in the night sky for what seemed like an eternity, it landed behind the fence. By now, it was after midnight on the 3rd of July, and the greatest game ever pitched had finally ended. Basically, it was about 2 full games that only took a little over 4 hours. That's the way baseball was played in those days. So that's it. That's how the greatest game ever pitched ended. And you can imagine how much fun I had researching and writing it.
Jim.
So open to all questions and comments.
Jim, first of all, thanks for a great synopsis. And again, I've read the book. It is much, much more detailed than a 30-minute conversation. Jim, how could the members get the book if they so choose?
There's a source I like called abebooks.com, abebooks.com. I looked it up the other day, and you can get this book for $5.22. So that would be my recommendation.
abebooks.com.
Right.
Perfect. All right.
Me.
Frank, you're third on the list. We got Mars, Harvey, and then Frank.
Jim, thank you for joining us. I
You're welcome.
have the book. I hope it's the same one that you wrote. And I can't recall if I actually listened to the game from New York, because by that time, the Mets were already born and they may not have recreated it. Somehow I thought I listened to it. But nonetheless, Juan Marichal is my all-time favorite pitcher. I'm originally from New York, where I went to the Polo Grounds office often when the Giants were in New York. But I think you probably heard of this game. It happened in July 1st, 1933.
July
where
2nd,
Car-
July 2nd, exactly 30 years to the day before the Marichal Spahn game.
Okay, so let me go over that with you guys. It was a doubleheader against the Cardinals. In the first game, Carl Hubble versus Tex Carlton. It went 18 innings. Both pitchers went all the way, and Hubble didn't walk a batter. In the second game, Roy Parmalee bested Dizzy Dame in 9 innings, where they both pitched a complete game. My pop was an 18-year-old vendor working for Harry M. Stevens. So he worked the Polo Grounds when the Giants were home. And when the Yankees were home, he worked the Yankee Stadium. So he saw Ruth and Garrett. But he was a Giants fan. So he told me about that game many, many years ago. Although I see your point about the greatest game, but I have to say, an 18-inning game where Hubble didn't walk a batter might have even been better. What do you think?
Could be. I call this the greatest game because it matched a Hall of Famer, a sure shot Hall of Famer, against a young guy coming up and making his case for the Hall of Fame eventually. I think it was just kind of the moment, the two of them pitching against each other, that made this game really special. There were, of course, other long pitching duels, like the 26th inning game between the Braves and the Dodgers in 1920. But for me, this game was really special.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mars. Harvey, you're up.
Picking, first of all, Jim, that was a great presentation. Absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
Mars, I'm going to disagree with you to the extent that I think the Spahn Juan game is the greatest because of all. I didn't look up the rosters of that 1933 game, but it seemed that every other player in that game was a legitimate Hall of Famer. Nobody had a debate whether they belonged in the Hall of Fame.
Agreed.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Jim, you mentioned that your dad grew up in the Bronx and, of course, was a Yankees fan. Well, I was born in Brooklyn, raised in the Bronx. Naturally, I was a Giants fan. It had to come to that. I do want to, because I am what I am, a member of Gary's group. When you talk about Willie's catch, we are trying to school everybody to say catch and throw, because that was the whole play. It wasn't just the catch. Willie knew he had to hit the cutoff man to keep Larry Doby from scoring from second, and he did. And what I'd like you to comment on is, for all the negotiations that's going on, and I'm as disgusted as anybody with no baseball, but it seems that they have given up on the so-called phantom runner. If you had a phantom runner in that 16-inning game, it would have gone 16 innings. And I think, and you wouldn't be able to talk about this classic pitching duel. What are your thoughts on that?
But not everybody knows what a phantom runner is. Can you define it?
Well, during the last 2 years, if they go into extra innings, they put a runner on second base.
Oh, right.
I'm calling it the phantom runner because I don't know what else to call it.
Softball.
But I think it's a really bad thing because it prevents us from watching 16-inning games, these wonderful duels, and it makes it too easy to score. You know, you get a bunt and a sacrifice fly and the guy's home without a single hit in the inning. It's just as if they're trying to tell the players, we don't want you to work too hard. We want to baby you. And I think they may get rid of it. Manfred has indicated as much.
They did get rid of it. And they eliminated it in the playoffs too.
Yeah,
that's true.
That's a
Thanks,
good
Jim. You were terrific.
Thank you, Harvey. Frank Lewis, you're up.
This does anyone know that Warren Spahn had a case in the Supreme Court of the United States, Spahn versus Julian Messner Company, sometime in the late 60s, where the Supreme Court of the United States overruled, I think this is the way it turned out, overruled the highest court of New York. He sued for invasion of privacy, some biography, fictionalized intimate conversations with his wife. And he sued for violation of his privacy. And I think the highest court of New York ruled, it may be the other way, I've got to check it, or someone should check it. But I think he was entitled to damages for invasion of privacy for that reason. And
Yeah, this was kind of a template to other athletes accusing biographers of mistreating them. By and large, they've ruled for the writers rather than the subjects of the book. You're right, that did happen.
Sure Spahn lost that one.
Yeah.
someone look it up. I can, maybe Harvey, who's the, who can still use his computer. Spahn versus Julian Messner, mid-60s.
Yeah.
With my bad eyes, I can't do that anymore. But, Harvey, I'm delegating you to do that job. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Frank.
I do have something about that in the book, as a matter of fact. As Casey would say, you could look it up.
Yeah, I'll look it up, Frank, but I don't do legal research during during baseball Zooms.
Mr. Clank, you're up, Bill. Bill, turn on your.
I'm unmuted.
There you go.
Thank you very much for that book. It brought back to life that game that I listened to, laying in bed, listening to my transistor radio in Palo Alto, and off and on. Of course, I can't tell you I heard every pitch, but I did hear the final one, and that put Mays in the record book as well. I know this is about Marichal, but that put Mays in the record book for something that I don't think could ever be duplicated. He hit a home run in every inning, 1 to 16.
16. Yep.
And nobody's going to do that one. You
He's
know
the only
that.
one.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to really ask you about is the matchup, not just this matchup, but all the matchups that were coming about in that era where you had the ace of the staff facing the other ace. In your book, you do cite the fact that Marichal was 6-1. I went back only on Koufax, 7-1 against Koufax. Now, I don't know what he did against Gibson, but the one loss I did I watched on TV. It was in 1961 at the Coliseum, and those are the only games we could watch. But Marichal only lost once to Koufax, once to Spahn. I don't know. I ought to see how he did against Jenkins and Gibson,
Or Drysdale.
or Drysdale. Yeah. But he was a great matchup pitcher, and they would allow the matchups then.
They would. Yeah.
I don't think we're ever going to see that again. I don't know if anyone has any other information on the Marichal matchups against others. He never shied from it.
Yeah.
He never shied from going up against the best and besting them, obviously.
Well,
Yeah.
mostly they put Marichal against Drysdale, even though, like you say, he was 7-1, but they knew that it was going to be a low scoring game, and he had a slightly better chance against Drysdale, and McCovey owned Drysdale.
Right. That's true. To get McCovey in. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Bill.
you very much. You're welcome, Jim. Good to
Yes,
see
Jim, one quick question. I read that Marichal signed in 57 with the
Yeah.
Giants. Was he like one of the first Giants signed by the San Francisco Giants?
I think he probably was, yeah.
Right.
Because it was 1960 and they'd only been out there a couple of 3 years.
Yeah, because they said they were moving, and I assume that they probably signed them after the season had ended. And
Yeah, they had been scouting, starting in 1890 in Cuba. They'd been scouting the Caribbean, and they signed more great players from the Caribbean than anyone else. And of course, you look at their lineup of the 60s, and it was loaded with great players and future Hall of Famers. One of the things I say in the book, why didn't they win more often? And one of the reasons was that they didn't execute very well. Fielding could have been better. They didn't do all the small things. There was a joke at some point in Giant history. What do Giants infielders and Michael Jackson have in common? They both wear a glove on one hand for no apparent reason.
Thank you, Jim. Jeff Hennig, you're up.
Hi, Jim, first of all, great talk.
Thank you.
I think Marichal, when I was growing up, near the end of his career is about the time that I was old enough to really understand what he was all about. So he was probably my favorite Giant when I was growing up, and probably the highlight of my childhood was getting his autograph at Shea Stadium. I think I may have mentioned this on a previous meeting. And then he looked at myself and my mother, behind the Giants dugout and said, "Hold on, let me get you Willie Mays' autograph." He went down in the dugout, came back, and I had both names on the same baseball. But anyway, I think that Marichal is probably, in the Cy Young Award era, probably the greatest pitcher to never officially win a Cy Young. But as we all know, he had so many phenomenal seasons. He'd win 25. Koufax would win 26. The year Marichal won 26, Koufax won 27. The thing that stood out to me about Marichal, though, was he had so many different angles that he threw the ball, with that high leg kick, and then he would come from the side occasionally. But supposedly he had like 6 or 7 different angles that he'd throw from, and have 5 or 6 different speeds from like every angle. And I'll never forget that one year when he had 30 complete games. What made him so dominant? Was it because of all of the different varieties of pitches that he could throw at so many different angles and speeds? Was that his main?
Yeah.
I would say that was the main thing. Plus the high kicking delivery made it very hard for people to pick up the ball.
That's right.
After them. But I think one player said he thought Marichal had 25 different pitches. So he was a pretty hard guy to face.
Well, the reason why I think he probably never won the Cy Young was because of the sports writers with the Roseboro incident.
Well, the thing is, as you said, every time he had a good season, somebody else had a better one. In '68, I think he won 26 games. But that was the year that Bob Gibson had a 1.12 ERA. And he won the Cy Young. There was always someone better. But for the decade, Juan led all pitchers with 191 wins. And that's what he could be remembered for.
Thanks, Jeff. Lee Lowenfish, you're up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. The background was so moving about both of them had to deal with the serious health issues. The quick questions I had, the Billy Meyer that signed Warren Spahn, was that the man who wound up managing the Pittsburgh Pirates?
I don't know about that. Somebody will have to look that up, but I don't know if he was the one.
The other question, John Miller, the broadcaster, was on this Zoom a few months ago, and he told a story about Gaylord Perry. A few years later, pitched into extra innings, and he got a no decision. And he asked Willie, why didn't you hit a home run for me? And Willie said, "You didn't ask me."
That's a great story.
It's one of those great stories. Have you heard that? Or
I haven't. I'm glad you enlightened me. That's terrific. Yeah.
Thank you again.
Yeah.
Thanks. We got Paul Ellis and then Dave Lippman. Paul?
Yeah, Jim, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I'm a fellow Red Sox fan also. Western Mass is, rich in our blood. So that's terrific. But my question for you tonight is, did both Spahn and Marichal think that was the greatest game they ever pitched?
Well, Marichal never said that. And Spahn said his greatest regret in baseball was the final pitch he threw to Willie Mays. So it was actually a bad memory for him. Juan had so many great games that when he came into the clubhouse after the game, people didn't make a big deal out of it. They just figured he had a lot of these games in his repertoire down the road. And when Spahn came into the clubhouse, a lot of players had tears in their eyes, including Spahn. And they shook his hand and they congratulated him on a great game, but it kind of stuck in his craw for years. And he told his son that this was the one pitch he wanted to have back among all others.
Thank you, Paul. We're gonna go to Dave Lippman and then Hindi. Dave?
Okay, first I want to say that was an absolutely fascinating, tremendous presentation about
Thank you.
an incredible frame. I just wish I'd been old enough to see it. My question is basically a two-parter. The first is, what did Juan Marichal and Warren Spahn's descendants think of the book? And did you hear from any of the Giants and Braves who survive, who were still surviving with us today, what they thought of the book?
No, I didn't hear from them about the book. I certainly heard from them about the game. Some of them couldn't remember. Del Crandall said, it's worse than I thought. He was talking about his memory. And the game at the time didn't make much of an impact because it was played on the West Coast and it ended after midnight, too late for the East Coast TV stations and newspapers to pick it up. It got mentioned a couple of times 2 days after the game, but it really receded pretty quickly. Had there been a sports center, it would have been instantly immortalized. But
The New York Post published it.
Pardon me?
The New York Post was a late paper, so the box score in the game was in the Post.
Good.
Thank you.
But did any of these guys look at the book and did they have anything to say about it?
I don't know if any of the players ever read the book. But ball players are not great readers for the most part.
Well, I'm just something like this. I would have thought they might want to see, somebody's taken one of their bigger moments.
Yeah, I wish I'd heard from them.
Thanks, Dave. Hindi, you're up, Hindi.
It was a great presentation, and
Thank
I
you.
just want to share with you, I went to the Hall of Fame at Cooperstown with my husband for many years. Juan Marichal was the friendliest, most accessible person with pictures, with autographs. So this is one, if you can see it. Can you?
Yeah.
With
how nice.
Orlando Cepeda, who they call Cha-Cha.
Yeah.
That's 2010. This one is 03.
Mhm.
And then this one is
Oh,
about 10 years, a few years before that. He was just a great guy.
yeah, he was very popular in the Dominican Republic, maybe the most popular person on the island. He had a terrific golf tournament for all kinds of charities. He was the Minister of Sport. And significantly, I think he hired Haitians who were not popular in the DR. There's a lot of racism, but he reached out to them. And when we visited him, my wife and I, he was embarrassed at his townhouse in downtown Santo Domingo. He had to have a guy stationed outside with a machine gun.
Jeez.
That was a great embarrassment for him. He has a beautiful house with all kinds of artwork in it. And he is, everybody knows about him. We were taking a cab to his house and the driver didn't know what it was. So he kept stopping people and saying, La Casa de Juan Marichal. And somebody finally gave him the right direction and took us to his house.
If you ever been to Cooperstown, he's got to be close to 85. The man is always impeccably dressed, very
Right.
distinguished, and really so well kept. Fred Cohn, did you have a question?
I sure did. Hey, Jim, what a great presentation. Great talk.
Thank you.
I had no idea that Warren Spahn slept, you said, basically in dirt tracks in the war.
That I knew.
That took me to another level. Also, I was born and raised in San Francisco, and probably my second home was Candlestick Park. I have, if I can remember, I have two questions. since each pitcher pitched so many pitches, do they actually skip their next rotation?
Spahn took Marichal aside the next day and suggested he take an extra day off, which he did. And the game didn't hurt them down the road. I think Spahn won 23 games. It was his last great season. He had a little arm trouble, but this was only in mid-season, and he kept pitching and winning. And
Great.
Marichal-
My other question is, how many complete games did Spahn pitch and how many did Marichal pitch? Complete games in their career?
I don't have that in front of me, but it was a whole lot, to be sure. I think something like 300 apiece.
Wow. Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Jim. I want to thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed your book too. Two things that I learned from the book, because it was more, in addition to the game, it was the biographies were great too. Marichal pitched injured a lot. I remember you talking about in the book he had, was it a fractured toe or something with his foot, where he pitched like 90 games with that, right?
Yeah. Well, he had back trouble all during his career.
Yeah, that too, yeah.
He was always in some pain. Trying to look up the question about complete games, but keep talking.
No, but
It's about 250, close to it.
Uh-huh.
But
He's got one more complete game than he has wins.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. Marichal,
I think it's 238 and 239 on the complete games.
Lou has it there, 244 and 238.
okay, good.
Thank you, Lou.
Yeah, 244 for Marichal, and about the same for Spahn. Let's see. Well, keep going. I'm looking it up here.
Jim, I have one
Oh,
question while you're looking.
Yeah.
In the book also, you talked about all the bad trades they made in the mid 60s and everything. Marichal, actually, I think you spoke to him about it, right? All the bad trades that they made within the span of like 4 years, and that didn't help them either, right?
Right, yeah. The most famous one being Orlando Cepeda for Ray Sadecki.
Right,
Ooh.
right. That's
Yeah.
Ooh.
And then Gaylord Perry for Sam McDowell.
yeah, who was a
Yeah.
drunk.
Yeah. Stoneham did not encourage Chub Feeney enough, and Feeney indeed did make some bad trades, but I don't think Stoneham really pushed enough to create a great team. Spahn had 382 complete games, if you can imagine.
Wow.
I think he
He's
also
the
had more-
winningest left-hander.
363.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Bill, thanks. Andy, you're up.
Yes, hi, Jim. A fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Starting out with how you miss baseball nicknames, that's how the great Who's on First starts. They mentioned a few of the Boo Boo Barber and all that. And the other thing, same 8 guys in the lineup 2 years apart, that doesn't happen all that often these days.
Yeah. Here are some of the nicknames that I love from Giant history.
Okay, great.
Orta Jim O'Rourke, Amos the Hoosier Thunderbolt, Russie, Joe Ironman McGinnity, George High Pockets Kelly, Frankie the Fordham Flash Frisch, Bastard Melvin Ott, and Memphis Bill Terry. You just don't see
The
that.
Dominican Dandy and the
Yeah.
Meal Ticket.
Right.
And the Say Hey Kid.
Yeah.
And the Say Hey Kid, right. The Baby Bull.
Stretch.
Yeah.
Lee, you're up, Lee.
Yeah, I've heard that extra day that Marichal took after that great game was the only time he took the extra day. Is that right?
Pretty much. He expected to pitch every 4th day, and did.
That was Alvin Dark's urging.
Andy, did I cut you off?
Yeah.
Andy Bumgarner, did I cut you off?
You did not. You did.
Thank you.
You did
Anybody
not cut
else?
me off. Thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Fred, go ahead, and then George Gregor.
Yeah. Curious, who were the Giant announcers at that time? Was it Was it Hodges and Simmons for that game?
I don't know. I suspect it wasn't them, but I could be wrong. I think Hodges died pretty young.
No, Hodges died in 71.
Okay, yeah. I don't know who the broadcasters were.
One more thing. Did either of the pitchers get any hits in those games?
Spahn got that double off the right field fence. He also, I believe, led all pitchers in baseball history with 35 home runs. I could be
Really?
wrong about that, but
Wes Farrell, maybe.
Yeah, he was capable of going long.
Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth.
Yeah. I don't know how many he had as a pitcher, Ruth, but you could be right.
Jim, you
No,
got,
no,
Jim, you have time
Shatani,
for a couple more?
Sure.
All right, we'll go to George and then Harvey.
Yeah. Hi, Jim. Thank you. Excellent. Del Crandall, the next season as a Giant, won that last game against the Mets that went from 1 month to the next. It played about 11 hours.
23 innings.
Yeah. And Crandall, yeah, he was a Giant like he was, like Spahn was at the end of his career and others. Crandall died last year on Willie Mays' birthday.
He was a great catcher.
was
Crandall
great.
was,
Well,
I think, one of the best.
He and Del Rice shared, as you remember. If Gary sends me your mailing address, I'm going to send you my Braves, my Boston, my Boston Red Sox. If you're interested, I got those books. My fourth book. I'll get Gary to.
Yeah, the first game I ever saw was in Braves Field, I think in 1952, their last season. They were playing the Dodgers, and it was a cold day, overcast. Dodgers were killing them, and I went with my mother and a friend, and we actually left early. But the one thing I remember is that I saw Jackie Robinson, which made the day worthwhile.
And Eddie Matthews played in 3 places, right?
Right. He was the only one.
Yeah, Boston, Milwaukee, and Atlanta.
Yeah.
Thanks, George. All right, we're going to go to Ed, Harvey, and wrap it up with Bill Klink.
Yeah, I'll just mention, as I said earlier, I did get the pleasure of meeting Warren Spahn after he retired at a banquet dinner, and just like somebody else said, couldn't have been any friendlier. I was at that doubleheader for Memorial Day 1963, when you talk about Del Crandall winning the game. We stayed till the end, but the first game went 10 innings, and I believe Marichal pitched it.
Could be.
Mays played shortstop.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Thanks,
What
Ed.
happened? Okay.
Harvey?
Well, it dawned on me while everybody was talking that Willie actually had Spahny's number, because somewhere around 1951, Willie hit his first home run off Spahn.
That's right.
Yeah, he had gone 0 for 12. And Spahn said afterwards, if only I'd gotten Mays out, we might never have had to deal with him.
I also remember somewhere I read that Spahny said, they asked him about the pitch he threw Willie. He said it was pretty good for 60 feet.
Yeah, right. He did say that. In fact, that's in the book. Right.
Thanks, Harvey. Bill, wrap it up.
Wrap it up. I gotta.
Unmute, Bill.
I unmuted. It's always a pleasure. Yeah, to do that. I was fortunate enough to get a couple of the ball players who played in that game to write me back about it. I'll share with you what they said. Usually when you get these, they are the lesser known players. In fact, these guys didn't even play. That's why they probably had good reflections. Frank Funk, an ex-Giant, along with Mantle and Warren Spahn, was, in my opinion, the best ever to play the game of baseball. Even though I came up as a Giant through the Giants farm system, I was hoping Spahny would win that game. That was a pitching duel seldom and never to be seen. Every time Spahny pitched, the bullpen could just as well cook some ribs and have a barbecue. And another by the name of Bob Sadowski, a journeyman infielder, outfielder. Marichal running, jumping from the dugout for 16 innings. Spahn, the old man, walking bench shoulders for 16 innings. Awesome. Spahn walking into the locker room, a standing ovation. Wet eyes were many. Totally awesome. Bob. So you get the best stuff from the lesser lights.
That's terrific. Thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Bill. So Jim, listen, best way to get the book again is aidbooks.com.
Yeah. Can I segue the conversation a little bit into what's wrong with baseball today?
The floor is yours.
Yeah. One of the postseason games, it was low scoring. It took more than 4 hours and 16 pitches were used. There are old timers like Jim Cott and Bert Blyleven who are just apoplectic about the lack of complete games. And I think the clubs are in love with analytics, and they do serve some purpose. Facts are good, data are good, videotape is good, the players swear by it, but there's a danger of turning analytics into a religion. Thou shalt not face the same lineup 3 times. Like I remember a game this year when a Red Sox pitcher, Tanner Houck, threw 5 perfect innings. He hadn't even faced the lineup twice, much less 3 times, and they took him out. It would have been a nice gesture if they'd left the winning pitcher in the last World Series game in to pitch the full 9. Max went 7 innings, shutout, threw something like 70 pitches, and they took him out. I think one of the specific dangers of this, trotting out one reliever after another, is that one of these guys might be having a bad day, and he might blow the whole thing. Why not leave starters in at least to go 6 or 7 innings, if not complete games?
So look at the
Something to do.
managers that took out pitchers throwing no hitters. That rookie pitcher for the Dodgers that Dave Roberts took out had a no hitter against the Giants, and then they brought in the reliever. The Giants won the game.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, before we wrap it up and say goodbye, one last thing. Do you know of the relationship? I know Spahn finished his career with the Giants when Marichal was still, in the 665, I think it was. Any knowledge of their relationship when Spahn joined the Giants?
Yeah, they became fast friends, and Spahn was treated like an oracle in the clubhouse. Everybody wanted to talk to him and hear what he had to say. And he and Willie McCovey were constantly jousting back and forth about the home run McCovey hit that was ruled foul. There was always a lot of humor around these guys.
Thank you so much, Jim. Jim, please don't be a stranger. Let's all give it up for Jim Kaplan.
Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, thanks again, Jim. Gentlemen, next week we have Scott Petoniak, who's going to be talking about Johnny Antonelli. Johnny's late wife will also be joining us, so that'll be a nice little treat.
Johnny's late wife or the wife of late Johnny?
Whatever makes you happy.
I hope she's not late to the meeting.
And one other thing, if the Giant Mets series gets canceled, which looks like we'll try to get another guest on that week. I left that week totally open because I thought we'd be going some of us to the game together. So anyway, I'll be hanging out in here for a little bit. Jim, thanks again. Don't be a stranger. Please hop on board. Now that you know how to do Zoom, I'm so proud of you. Awesome.
First time I've done it.
Did a great job, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Be well, everybody.
Thanks, folks.